Domestic violence has traditionally been understood as a crime perpetrated by men against women. On the 23rd of August 2015, 51-year-old David Edwards was murdered in his home in Chorley, Lancashire. The facts surrounding his death and the shocking events leading up to it would challenge preconceptions about male domestic abuse. David Edwards was well loved by those close to him.
A proper gentleman, funny as anything, always smiling, had a lot to say. A very keen Chorley football fan. Every match he went, he bought a shirt.
David had a brilliant personality and we connected straight away. He was very light-hearted, easy to get on with, passionate about his football, about his job.
And it was David's professional abilities that gained him respect locally.
David was a very, very popular criminal lawyer. He loved his job. He was driven by it. I used to go to court as well and watch him because I found it absolutely breathtaking the way he performed.
After meeting on a night out at a local pub, David and Debbie's relationship went from strength to strength as a couple prepared to welcome a new arrival.
I was pregnant and David was absolutely over the moon. He really wanted a child of his own because he'd never had one. He was ecstatic. David was perfect during my pregnancy. He looked after me, cooked for me. He came to all the scans, the hospital appointments.
And when daughter Mahalia was born, David was thrilled.
It was very emotional seeing David holding her for the first time, with tears rolling down his face. It was a happy moment. I came out of hospital and David helped with the night feeds. David would change the nappies. He was a very good dad.
They had many happy years as a family, but when Mahalia was 5, the cracks started to appear.
Man and David's relationship started to fizzle out, but we remained really, really good friends. I was still cooking for him and doing his washing. We did speak about getting back together.
But sadly, the couple were never to reconcile. After 7 months apart, David had embarked on a new relationship with 41-year-old Sharon Manser. They had first met many years ago when David was representing Sharon's ex-partner.
They seemed very happy, but very early on into the relationship, David had got a broken collarbone, and he said he'd fallen downstairs. I had no reason to disbelieve him at the time.
Sharing a daughter with David meant Debbie and Sharon would, of course, inevitably come into contact.
The very first time I saw Sharon, she was outside my door, kicking at it. I'd just come home from work. Mahalia was supposed to be going to a party. David was picking her up. But they'd both been drinking till the early hours of the morning. And I said, no, you're not driving her anywhere while you've been drinking. And that's the reason she came to the house and was kicking my door to try and get Mahalia out. We more or less had a massive argument at the front. I took an instant dislike to her.
Debbie was still keen for Mahalia to have a relationship with her father, and satisfied her daughter would be safe, she allowed David access.
Mahalia would go and stay over. I didn't have a problem with that. Sharon seemed nice with Mahalia.
But as Sharon and David's relationship progressed, Debbie grew concerned about David.
He would turn up to collect Mahalia, and he'd have bruises, black eyes, burst lips, scratches. Each time I asked him what he'd done, he'd say he'd fallen or he'd walked into a wall or a garage door.
I noticed some scratches on his face. And I said to Dave, what's happened to you? Oh, a cat scratched me. I said, it's a cat? I said, Dave, your ear's bleeding and your glasses are twisted. Oh, yeah. I fell over. I said, you just told me the cat's done it. So he lied to me. And I knew something was going on.
It was becoming clear to those around him that David's injuries were far from accidental.
On Father's Day 2015, David had rang me up to say that he couldn't have Mahalia that day, which I thought was terrible. So I thought I'd go down to the house and confront him. When I got there, David was a mess. He'd got deep scratches down the side of his face, 2 black eyes, busted lip, fingerprint bruising around his neck, and he was trembling. I could understand then that he didn't want Mahalia to see him in that state. I said, what's happened? Has she done this to you? He said, no, I've fallen. I just said, you don't get fingernail scratches falling. That was when I realised how bad it was. The severity of that attack was terrible.
But eventually, David did start to confide in others that Sharon was responsible for his injuries.
I think he'd admitted to a few of his work colleagues some of the things she were doing, like throwing ashtrays at him, a glass table. But he wouldn't take it any further. He wouldn't press charges, he just denied everything.
I met him and he had a big cut across his nose, all the way across. He just said, Sharon had a drink and she's hit me with the phone. I were a bit shocked, because he was very soft, Dave, and I don't think he's ever met a woman like that.
In the wake of these revelations, rather than split with Sharon, David had plans to cement their relationship.
He told me he was getting married. I did ask him not to do it. I said, because I think things will get worse once you've made her your wife.
He said to me, if I don't go, she will kill me. I said, who does she think she is? I said, I'll go and speak to her. He said, Cougar, please don't tell her I told you this. I have to marry her.
Exactly 12 months to the day that they'd started dating, David and Sharon were married in a 10-minute ceremony at a Las Vegas chapel.
It was just those two that attended it. I don't know what hold she had over him, but obviously she had a big hold, because he still went ahead and did it. The night before the wedding in Las Vegas, she'd hit him with the phone, and he had a black eye, because on his wedding pictures he's got foundation on, covering a black eye, but you can clearly see it on some of the pictures.
Rather than marital bliss, on their return, things got even worse for David.
She wouldn't let me speak to him after the wedding. She said everything I had to say had to go through her. I saw him, obviously, a few times, but she was always stood at the side of him. I couldn't speak to him on my own. Physically and emotionally, he was a mess. He'd lost so much weight. He'd started to stoop. He wouldn't look people in the face. It was so sad to see such a big 6'2" man to look like that.
It wasn't just friends and family who noticed David's demise.
I believe his work suffered. He weren't turning up for work. He'd letting his clients down, and that was not David. He never ever did that when I was with him. She kept turning up at work and making a nuisance of herself, threatening his staff, his secretary.
His secretary said Sharon's been to the office and kicking off. First she's been blowing the phone up, because I said he's out in court. She didn't believe me. She's come down and kicked off with me at the office.
Up until now, Debbie had allowed Mahalia to continue to see her father. But an event nearly 4 weeks after the wedding pushed Debbie to breaking point.
He'd got a massive cut on the bridge of his nose. Again, he was trembling. He'd lost so much weight. He was a mess. From that day, I actually stopped all contact. Basically said to David, if you want to see her, you come up to my house on your own, or I'll meet you somewhere on your own. I said, but my daughter is going nowhere near her.
After this incident, it was 2 weeks before Debbie heard from David.
He rang me up, and he was absolutely heartbroken. He said he was missing Mahalia. And his words were, my life's hell down there. He said, I'm living in hell. And I basically said, you need to get out, you need to leave her. So if you don't, David, she's going to kill you. And that's the last conversation I had with him.
Sadly, David did not heed Debbie's warning. And 19 days later, on the 24th of August 2015, Debbie got a knock on the door.
I answered the door and they said that they were police officers. I'm like, have I done something wrong? So they came in and the words were, there's no easy way to tell you this, but David was killed last night. And my instant reaction was, has she done it?
Coming up, shocking footage is revealed of David and Sharon just hours before his death.
The police came across David and Sharon arguing in the street, both very drunk. Sharon was predominantly the aggressor, and that was captured on the body-worn video.
Right, get off me! Don't you dare touch me! Don't you go back down there! Don't you dare touch me!
Well-respected criminal solicitor David Edwards had married girlfriend Sharon after only 12 months of dating. But their union was ill-fated from the outset. As for most of their fledgling relationship, David had been suffering abuse at Sharon's hands. Now only 2 months into their marriage, David was lying dead in his own bed. And surprisingly, it was wife Sharon who'd raised the alarm.
Sharon came out hysterical that David wasn't breathing, asking someone to call an ambulance, and a neighbour actually used Sharon's phone to do that. The ambulance service attended the home address. They'd made an assessment that it was suspicious. He was laying in the bed with a clear puncture wound to his chest and been bleeding from that. In addition to that, Sharon had already alluded to the ambulance service that they had had an argument, and at some point a knife had been involved. Attending officers made the decision that they would arrest her on suspicion of murder.
Sharon was taken into custody at Preston Police Station.
When Sharon was initially interviewed, she was in complete denial that David was actually dead. She wouldn't believe the police officers, as she repeatedly insisted on speaking to her husband. She was also in denial around her culpability. Her account was that her and David had argued. They'd both torn up some wedding photographs, and it resulted in him arming himself with a knife in the kitchen, which she somehow managed to take off him, and she believes that he walked in onto the blade, and that resulted in the stab wound to his chest.
But the police were not convinced by Sharon's elaborate story, and it was down to Dean Holden and his team to uncover the truth surrounding David's death.
What we learned very quickly is that Sharon was a very aggressive, volatile individual, so it was my belief from the outset that she was definitely capable of wanting to cause someone serious harm.
The police needed to gather evidence to prove that Sharon Edwards had murdered her husband, and the scene of the crime was Dean's first port of call.
The house was quite a nice house in a nice locality. Within the house, it was quite unkept. There's clear evidence of quite a lot of alcohol abuse. Both David and Sharon were heavy drinkers. But in terms of the kitchen and the actual scene of the stabbing, it was relatively clean, and what was obvious is that there had been some element of a clean-up operation. Where David was found was an upstairs bedroom. The mattress was very stained with blood. David had probably lain there, bleeding out from his injury.
The pathology report concluded that David's cause of death was a single stab wound to the heart, immediately disproving Sharon's account of events.
The concept of Sharon saying David walked onto the knife is impossible, basically. It must have been some level of force to go through his chest and into his heart.
The pathologist also disclosed that David's death would have been slow.
Because it was such a slight nick to the heart, the blood would have seeped out over a period of time. What Sharon did say in interviews is that she wanted to call an ambulance, but he told her not to. We'll never know whether that's true or not. But a hypothesis is that he was stabbed much earlier, died, and that Sharon may have spent an hour or two actually contemplating what to do. Her hysterical nature when she came out of the house was actually all an act, just for neighbours. A bit of theatre, really, to try and make people believe that she was as shocked as anybody else.
Locating witnesses was key to the investigation, particularly those who'd seen the couple in the early hours leading up to David's death.
David and Sharon had visited the local off-licence the night before, and the shopkeeper and two customers actually witnessed quite a hostile verbal altercation whereby Sharon was very aggressive towards David, so much so that the customers tried to intervene and calm her down.
Unbelievably, the police themselves actually caught on camera the couple's volatile state that night, just 18 hours before David was reported dead.
The police came across David and Sharon arguing in the street, both very drunk. Sharon was predominantly the aggressor, and that was captured on the body-worn video.
What's going on? Hi. Yeah, what's happening? Because I've just come round that roundabout and seen you ragging him around. So you're going to tell me what's happening?
We're drunk and we're going home.
Yeah. Come take a seat in the back of my car while I can get somebody else to come and speak to your partner.
I don't think so.
I do. I'm not asking.
Will you listen to the live podcast?
Oh, David. Seriously? Seriously? Solicitor or no solicitor?
Right, get off me! Don't you dare touch me! Don't you go back down there!
Don't you dare touch me!
A possible reason for Sharon's escalation in anger that night could have been down to the fact that David had recently lost his job.
David's employment came to a conclusion because they'd lost a little bit of confidence in David and his ability to operate because of the way he was coming to work, dishevelled, sometimes smelling of alcohol, but also with injuries. Sharon, I think, took this quite badly, and I think the perception is that Sharon quite liked being the solicitor's wife.
David, she touched me! She touched me!
Bring it down, OK?
No, she touched me!
Yes, and I'll touch it again unless you shut up and calm down. I will arrest you.
Please,
OK?
shut up.
The irony is that Sharon's attraction to David, we think, is his status as a very respected local solicitor, a very good job, nice house, and no doubt a good salary. And bit by bit, she chipped away and almost dismantled that and destroyed that. And what was left then was a man without his job, mounting debts, a house that should have been nice but was looking somewhat dishevelled. And physically, David was a different man.
The luxury life David's job had afforded the couple was to become a thing of the past. And as the witnesses and body cam footage suggest, in the hours leading up to David's death, Sharon was a woman capable of violence. The police did not arrest Sharon.
The police assessed the situation and chose on that occasion to take them both home, mainly because David denied that he'd been assaulted and that his injuries were as a result of a fall, and they'd had a disagreement.
We're going to get a free lift home.
Where?
Take
Free lift home. What did you say? Free lift home. You idiot. Come on, free lift home. Move.
Even at this stage, David was still protecting Sharon and lying about the cause of his injuries. Mark Brooks, who provides support for male victims of domestic abuse, thinks he knows why.
Men often don't come forward because they feel a sense of shame. It undermines their whole sense of what it means to be a man, undermines their self-worth and also their pride. But importantly, also they feel that they won't be believed, that if they do come forward, that they will be laughed at and not taken seriously.
But as the couple were taken home by police car, Sharon's departing words were a chilling prophecy for what lay ahead.
I swear, David, when I wake up tomorrow, I don't know what mood I'm going to be in.
There you go, Sharon.
Thank you,
Not a
officer.
problem.
Oh, why have you been so nice?
Because you've been nice to me, haven't you?
I'm so going to have to kill. Well, when I say I kill him, I'm not literally going to kill him.
Hours later, David was dead. Helped along by statements from friends, family and work colleagues, police were building a true picture of David's environment of abuse, and his medical records contained further evidence.
We believe that there was an altercation where he was probably assaulted by Sharon, which resulted in his admission to A&E in Bolton. David did actually make a disclosure to them that he was the victim of domestic abuse and that Sharon was responsible for his injuries on that night. They did make some referrals into the appropriate agencies, but unfortunately that didn't come to any great fruition in terms of safeguarding, probably because David, when he reflected on it, would tell lies or cover up for Sharon's behaviour.
He didn't have the confidence to actually go through a complete disclosure, and also at the back of his mind he always was in fear of Sharon.
Sadly, David continued to live with Sharon's regular attacks, further evidence in the post-mortem results.
The pathologist noted between 50 and 60 non-accidental injuries about his body, some of which were poke and prod wounds, consistent possibly with a sharp implement, and his assessment was that he'd been the victim of sustained violence over a period of time.
The police had enough evidence to charge Sharon with David's murder.
Sharon was never released on bail. She remained in custody, and eventually we got authorisation from the Crown Prosecution Service to charge her with murder, and she was remanded. She's always denied any culpability, not only in relation to the fatal stabbing, but also that she was physically abusing him.
With Sharon pleading not guilty, the case went to trial.
It was very important that I was there. I needed to be there. Then in later years I can actually tell Mahalia what happened.
It was never really clear what her defence case was, but it seemed to range from an accidental stabbing to self-defence to possibly David having done it himself. And even when Sharon gave evidence, it was still not clear around what a defence was.
When they played videos of David, she broke down and started screaming. She wouldn't look at anybody.
She was quite vocal sometimes when individuals were given evidence, to the point where the judge had to warn her to behave and to be quiet. Well, I think it's fair to say that she was probably quite problematic during the trial for all concerned.
But the jury received a true reflection of the abuse David was living with on a daily basis. They even heard it from David himself. Police had recovered David's side of a conversation with Sharon, which he'd accidentally recorded after leaving his dictaphone running.
He has a conversation with Sharon saying that they have to come up with a different idea as to how he sustained the injuries because no one's buying the garage door story.
We're going to have to refine the excuse for me eye. You know, the garage door that we made up? That doesn't wash, I've just told Chris, and he's not having it. You said to me, I'd like to think that I could punch you and knock you out with a single punch. Well, I've told you do it rather hard, Sharon, don't you?
And after a 2-week trial, the verdict was in.
She's sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 20 years, so she'll have to serve 20 years before she can apply for parole. She became very tearful and reacted, as you would expect, really very upset. My personal view is I think she's upset because she's been caught out and she's facing 20 years in prison, as opposed to the fact that she feels remorseful for what she did.
It was a very good feeling, but that won't bring Dave back. And I thought, you deserve to rot in hell.
For David, it was too late, but the lessons learnt from this case are now being used to help others.
The thing that surprised me most about David's murder is how many red flags that were missed by many individuals to intervene. It just seems a real pity that we didn't put all those pieces together collectively and prevent it escalating to a murder.
If a man gives information that leads you to suspect he is a victim of domestic abuse, you have a moral responsibility to call 999 or go to the police station. You can't just rely on the person who is a victim, who is psychologically and mentally controlled, to actually do all of that.
Fortunately, male domestic abuse is increasingly being recognised, and the Mankind Initiative charity is one of the agencies there to help.
We give men the confidence that they're not alone, they're not to blame, and they're not weak, and that they can escape.
We had a sale of David's football shirts. He had a collection of probably well over 600, and we had donated all the money to Mankind. He was well-liked, he was lovable, he was a cheeky character. I'm just one of those people, and I will do my best to keep his memory alive for his daughter.
It's a common misconception that only women can be victims of domestic abuse. But David's story goes to prove that men are also at risk. Hopefully in its retelling, other lives will be saved, and male victims will come forward to report this horrific crime. Coming up, a new relationship soon turns sour.
He literally grabbed me by the neck up against my wardrobe and started strangling me.
He said, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. He said, I'm not feeling very well.
Finding love online is common these days and has led to a number of successful relationships. But how much do we really know about the person sending us messages? How easy is it to build a fake persona? And if we allow them into our lives and homes, can they really be trusted? This is the case of Jodie Nicholson. Jodie Nicholson was on the lookout for love.
She was looking to find a partner, and probably a partner for life, you know, with the possibility of a family.
In March 2015, Jodie had turned to online dating sites to help with her search. And on one particular app, it seemed she might have found the perfect match.
He sort of gave me that message, that, hi, beautiful, how are you? And straight away I was like, oh, look, he's this cute guy. He said how he liked cooking, making a girl feel like a princess, typical gentleman. So you sort of look at it and go, oh my God, he's like a Prince Charming.
The man on the other end of the phone was Sam Poplar, who lived in Margate, Kent, just 5 miles from Jodie's home in Ramsgate.
He started off with the cute little message, started making me laugh and smile. We started talking.
After a week of messaging, the pair arranged to meet up.
When I met him, I did think, oh my gosh, you're quite nice, you are. He was quite my type.
During this first date, Sam confided in Jodie about his tragic past.
He told me straight away that his mum died of cancer. I felt terrible for him. Losing his mum at such an age, it's a disgusting disease for anyone to go through. So when he told me that, I just said to him, oh, babe, come here, and gave him a hug. We started talking all the time, every day. We met quite a few times after the first time. Then he come round my mum and dad's house.
He seemed very charming, nice, and intelligent, caring.
He said that his mother had died and he'd been with her right to the end and actually switched the machine off. Having lost my mother only a couple of years before, I was very sympathetic to that.
The family were living in temporary accommodation after a house fire, and it wasn't long before Sam came to join them.
He just started to say that he hadn't got anywhere to go, he was homeless.
He explained that he owned some properties but couldn't get into them at the moment. They were tenanted out, and he'd been working as an electrician in Margate on the fairground there, and that his contract had come to an end, and therefore his accommodation had come to an end with it.
We were like, you just want to stay here until you can get yourself sorted.
Jodie said, Sam's going to stay for a few days. I've okayed it with Mum, and I wasn't overly pleased because I don't like bombshells dropping like that. And I checked with Jan, and she said, yeah, oh, yes, yeah, it's fine. He's just staying for a few days whilst he finds somewhere to stay.
We're sort of people that help anybody out. It's an open house, and we welcomed him with open arms. Of course, all these awful tales of things got to my heartstrings.
Days turned to weeks, and Sam soon became part of the family.
My wife was besotted with him in a motherly way. Because he didn't work, she was with him all day, every day, whilst my daughter did work.
I was actually a care worker, so I wasn't in most of the time. I'd done quite a lot of hours. But when I used to come home, Sam would cook dinner. He'd be there for my mum. They'd watch TV together, all quizzes, and I'd come in and hear them laughing together. It was all just really happy. It just seemed like the perfect family, really.
You just seemed so nice. We really thought that this was the one for Jodie. As the months went on, I thought of him like a son.
But Jodie started to notice something unusual about Sam's behaviour.
He was very on edge all the time, like he had something to hide and I could never figure out what it was. Very paranoid, always looking over his shoulder. I thought to myself, something's not right here. And I said to him, are you all right? And he was like, oh, I suffer from anxiety.
And it seems Sam was happy to stay around the house rather than look for work.
I did say to him, you really should be looking for a job, because as the weeks went on, it became obvious that I was supporting him in every way financially. Well, I actually did get him a job briefly in a care home, but he started to behave very badly there and wouldn't give them any of his details. I was trying to say to my wife, he's a man not to be trusted and we should be more careful. She was fond of him and kind of thought, well, he's got his faults, but he seems to make Jodie happy. But to me, integrity is everything. So from that moment on, I was very anxious about him.
Jodie, however, was now allowing Sam to help with her finances.
Jodie suffers from a condition called dyscalculia, which is similar to dyslexic.
I've got problems with maths, so I don't understand money. I get a bit confused with it. So Sam said that he'd help me look after my money, budget it with me. He started to take my bank card, and he had control of it.
Now firmly a member of the household, Sam's behaviour towards Jodie gradually started to change.
It started with my appearance first. He started becoming very controlling. I had my hair bleached, I had hair extensions, and he come home one day and said, you look disgusting. I don't like you like that. He said, you look cheap, you need to change now as I'm leaving you. I had to take them all out, so I had really short hair. I wasn't allowed no makeup. He's made me delete Facebook. I couldn't talk to any of my friends, and he literally got my phone and smashed it into a door because he didn't want me talking to anyone. We didn't go out, we just sat indoors all day. We wouldn't do anything.
Sometimes she would come home exhausted, and the things he would say to her were just very cruel and nasty.
I was never sure what mood Sam would be in, and it would be like treading on eggshells. I'd be so worried. He'd be all right to my mum and dad, and then I'd come in and I'd see this like slidey look he'd give me, and I'd be like, oh no, I'm in for it now. I'd go outside and have a cigarette, and he'd go, you stink. Go and have a shower, you're disgusting.
Having taken possession of her bank card, Sam was now also controlling Jodie's access to her own money.
When I went to ask for it, I'd get called all the names under the sun, and then he'd give me the money begrudgingly and go, there you go, tramp, and just chuck £20 at me.
This even led to a physical altercation 7 months into the relationship.
When he couldn't find my bank card, he literally grabbed me by the neck up against my wardrobe and started strangling me. And I was screaming and I kicked him and said, "Get off me." And my mum said, "What's going on?"
If I said something, he would then sort of turn on me. And then he'd say, "I'm sorry, I'm really sorry." He said, "I'm not feeling very well."
I'd say to him, "Why are you being so horrible?" And then he'd come up to me crying, "Oh, baby, I love you so much. I'm so sorry." Every time he was horrible to me, I felt like it was my fault. He was slowly changing me into a person that I wasn't. But because you're just so loved up, you don't notice it, do you?
Christmas Day 2015 saw a surprise development in Jodie and Sam's relationship.
He said to me, "Read that, please." It said, "Will you marry me?" I cried my eyes out and I was really happy and I thought, OK, maybe he's starting to change.
Simon lent him the money to get a ring and Jodie was over the moon, of course.
But this wasn't Sam's only bombshell that day.
It was about 2 hours later, we started crying and we were like, "Sam, Sam," and he said that he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer. And we were just so shocked and upset about it.
We were all emotional, including myself, because no one wants to see someone like that. It was quite a sad time, really.
He'd call me in the middle of the night, screaming, curled up in the ball in the bathroom, and be coughing blood up, and it'd be everywhere.
He started telling us that he had doctors and hospital appointments to go to. Obviously, us caring about him, we offered to go with him. "No, no, no, I don't want you to, I don't want you to." He would not let us anywhere near these hospital appointments.
Sam was also behaving strangely in other ways.
He was always waiting for the postman, but I thought it was because he smoked. But we did notice that it was very strange. He always used to bring the post in and even trained our Yorkshire Terrier, if he didn't get there first, to pull the post out of the letterbox and give it to him.
We went to bed, he'd often come down and I would hear him come down because you'd hear the stairs creak. And I'd say, "What's wrong?" He said, "Oh, I'm really not very well tonight. I was going to have a cigarette and go back to bed."
He'd be up all night doing stuff. I just thought, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm just having a cigarette. I'll be up in a minute, babe." About an hour later, he'd come up.
But Simon was growing more and more suspicious of Sam.
He kept on saying, "I'm going to have chemotherapy soon," and the window for someone who's diagnosed with cancer is very short. And of course, the chemotherapy never happened. And I actually was able to find out that he'd never been to the hospital for cancer and he'd never been diagnosed of it. And when I told my wife, she couldn't believe it. I said, "He's a liar, he's a charlatan, he must go." She said, "No, no, no, he's an ill man."
I was smitten with him. He would tell me jump and I'd say how high, so he knew he could get away with it.
Jodie obviously wanted to remain in love with this man that was being increasingly unkind and hurtful and saying nasty things. I was just a man absolutely possessed with both anger and distress the whole time. Every day, every week, every month, looking at him sitting in the chair, smirking and realising that there's something seriously wrong with you.
Coming up, Simon uncovers more lies.
I'd found out that his mother was alive and kicking.
And the truth comes out.
My wife, he cleared the whole of her account, everything. She'd been even less lucky than me.
In March 2015, Jodie Nicholson met fiancé Sam on a dating app. Within weeks, he'd moved into her family home. But Jodie's happiness was short-lived as Sam became abusive. He then told her he had cancer and used the illness as an excuse for his poor behavior. Jodie's dad, Simon, was growing suspicious of Sam. Convinced that he was lying about being sick, Simon was now moving closer to uncovering the real truth about the man, calling himself Sam Poplar. Sam had been unable to provide any ID for the job that Simon had found him at the care home, and now Simon knew why.
He gave a false name when he first came. He called himself Sam Poplar, but he wasn't. He was actually Sam Alexander. We had an unholy row over that.
A visit to the home uncovered yet another lie.
I was talking to the lady who manages it, and I said, I can't stand him in the house. It makes my flesh crawl. But I said, I do feel for him for losing his mother. She said, losing his mother? You've got to be joking. His mother lives in Margate, not dead at all. And at that point then, I was just absolutely white with rage. He could tell so many lies. That, for me, was the final straw. And I think nearly for Jan, but still, again, his persona come through. He said, well, she's not exactly dead, but we don't get on anymore, and all the rest of it.
Sam's days were numbered, but Simon had to convince Jodie and Janice once and for all that he was a con man.
A couple of times I said to my wife, I haven't had any statements from my savings account, have you? No, she said, no, I haven't. But she said, I think they might be doing them manually. And we thought, well, we've saved our money, it's safe, it's in the bank. It went to the back of our minds.
In July 2016, 16 months after Sam first came into their lives, Simon made his biggest discovery yet.
Something made me just go and check my bank account. And I thought, that's lower than normal. It was about, well, 10 or 12,000 pounds low. And I thought, no, I haven't spent it. I know I haven't. I went to the bank 2 days later and 2,000 pounds more had gone.
Simon had only one culprit in mind. And when the bank printed his statements, he saw how Sam had spent his money.
Constant betting sites, one after the other. And one set of betting, he'd spent £7,000 or £8,000 in one night between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning. So I guessed it was him because of the times and the fact that he used to say he couldn't sleep, he didn't feel well, and I knew it couldn't be anyone else. At that point, I went straight to the police station, and when I showed the bank statements to the officer, and he said, we're going round there now to arrest him.
The policeman advised Simon to stay away from home until Sam had been arrested.
Me, Mum and Sam were in the living room, and then the dog started going mental and barking. Sam looked out the window, he went, oh my God, it's the police, it's the police. He ran to the back door, and I said, why are you running for, Sam? And he was like, they've come for me, I know they've come for me, I know they've come for me. The police officer said, Samuel Alexander, I'm arresting you for fraud. And I thought, what? And I said to my mum, I was like, Mum, what is going on? We both started crying our eyes out.
I was shocked because I didn't know the police were turning up. When he was taken away, he was hanging on to me, screaming and crying. The police officer was reading out the charges to him, and he was literally, I've done nothing wrong, Jan. Promise you, you know I love you. And it was awful.
He got put in the police car, and my bedroom got literally turned upside down. That's when they found all the bank statements that had been hidden in his clothes and stuff.
For months, Sam had been intercepting the postman and taking the family's bank statements. Everything Sam had told them was a lie.
He didn't have cancer at all. We found out that after the police raided my room, the tablets that he actually had were for a stomach ulcer.
He could actually cough blood up from the acids, and he learned how to do it. Really thought he was seriously ill. He told me how he nursed his mum through cancer, even described putting white lilies on her coffin, which makes me sick because she is still alive.
And now Janice was about to unearth the shocking extent of Sam's fraud.
So I found a tiny piece of white paper, and as I pulled it open, there was a couple of statements of mine telling me that I had 69p from nearly £40,000. And I was so shocked. I mean, it literally made me feel very, very ill.
So this time I didn't realise that he'd had my wife's money as well. He cleared the whole of her account of everything. She'd been even less lucky than me.
That was savings for retirement. I saw my poor dad left me when he worked so hard. I've lost it all.
Jodie had also been targeted.
He was helping himself to my money without me realising. It was my wages from my work. He put me in debt. Then I found out that he was transferring my mum's money into my account, and I didn't realise we were spending my mum's inheritance.
Learning of Sam's deception was more than Jodie could bear.
He's probably the first guy I can say that I actually wanted a future with. To have somebody do that to you who you've trusted, and you were going to get married, you were going to start a family and everything, just to have them stab you in the back like that, it's just the ultimate betrayal. I just felt guilty. I just felt like it was my fault because no one wants to see their parents being robbed of their life savings.
In total, Sam was charged with taking approximately £55,000, although the family believed the true figure to be closer to £70,000. Both Simon and Janice kept their cards locked away, but solicitor Sean Joyce explains that Sam found a way to access them.
It would have been very easy for him to have stolen or even temporarily removed those cards and used them to make online purchases. The other thing, of course, is that if you're using a shared computer or tablet, these devices will often store that information. That gives very easy access to somebody who wants to take advantage of that.
But Sam was pleading his innocence, claiming he'd done nothing wrong.
Sam Alexander denied any responsibility for these offences, and a trial was fixed. So that meant that the police and the prosecution had to present evidence that would give them a reasonable prospect of conviction.
I was getting more anxious and worked up to the point where I had a mental breakdown over it. I ended up in hospital because I just couldn't take everything that he'd done, and in the build-up of the court, worrying about the court, it just broke me.
A few days before his trial, he changed his plea to guilty. Clearly, there was sufficient evidence provided to persuade Sam Alexander that it was in his own best interest to admit the offence.
When they finally said that Sam had pleaded guilty, I was so relieved.
Sam had been out on bail, and finally, in January 2018, a year and a half after he'd first been arrested, he was sentenced.
When I saw Sam standing there, he was very cocky, arrogant, full of himself. He nodded at me and said, "You're all right," and I just ignored him, carried on looking at the judge. I could see Sam laughing and smirking, just like it was all a joke.
And seeing him just smiling, how can you do that? Even in court, you're doing this. How can you, how dare you? You know, what you've done to me, what you've done to my daughter.
I read my statement out and I saw Sam looking at me, and then he pretended that he was upset. He put his hands in his arms like this, and I thought, that's fake. I can tell that's fake. Don't try and trick me.
The offences against Jodie and her family weren't the only crimes for which Sam Alexander was standing accused. Unbelievably, he'd committed a further fraud against a young woman whilst out on bail.
He defrauded another female of around £800, and that was detected, and he was charged with that offence as well.
It was time for the judge to pass sentence.
He imposed a sentence of 3.5 years for the offences of credit card fraud involving Mr. and Mrs. Gates and Jodie. And in addition to that, he imposed a 6-month consecutive sentence for the other offence that was committed whilst on bail, to increase the overall sentence to 4 years.
I don't think he thought he was going to get as long as that. He thought the whole way through that he was going to get away with it and not get sent to prison. When the judge finally sent him down for what he'd done, I think reality hit him then that actually this isn't a joke, this isn't funny. You are going to prison for what you've done.
For Jodie, Janice and Simon, it's taking a long time to get over Sam's betrayal.
At the moment, financially, it's really tough because Simon is now having to work much longer hours. He's not very well. It's just financially crippled us all.
We don't trust anyone anymore. It's completely changed our view of people, and it shouldn't be like that.
My wife and I have been together for 21 years, and up until Mr. Alexander came into our lives, I don't remember ever having a cross word. I always thought that my marriage was indestructible. And for the first time in all those years, I wondered if it would last the course. It was just absolutely awful. And that was, for me, even worse in some respects than losing the money, the fact that he actually was breaking my family up. And I was beside myself with anger. But time does mend things, and I'm very glad because we're exceptionally happy now.
And the family want to pass on a word of warning to all.
Be very careful who you trust. Ask questions even if you're embarrassed. And if you see this person, this Sam Alexander or Sam Poplar, whatever name he's using at the time, get him out of the house and out of your life immediately. because he is a very dangerous man.
When sentencing Sam Alexander, the judge also imposed a 10-year restraining order that prevents him from having any contact with Jodie and her family for that period of time. Through pursuing the banks, the family have managed to get some of their money back, but sadly,